Well, hey there. Good afternoon, everybody. Excited to see you. We are about 1 minute before start. So we intend to start on time, end on time. I'm sure we have folks coming in, joining from various meetings and whatnot around campus. So we're going to sit tight until 1 o'clock and then we'll get the ball rolling. Thanks for being here. All right. Well, it is 1 o'clock. See people filtering into the webinar. Great to see you. Thanks for being here. It's 1 o'clock. We got a lot of information to go over, and we want to do our best to honor your time. So we're gonna try and do our very best to start on time and end on time. So we're going to go ahead and get the ball rolling. Well, thank you so much for joining this webinar, Designing for Decisions. I realize there are a lot of places where you could choose to spend your time this afternoon, and we are grateful that you chose to spend it with us, and we hope it is well worth the next hour of your time in the middle of your busy day. So thanks for being here. Uh, just as a quick note, everything that we are talking about today is contained in this larger report called Designing for Decisions. You can download a copy. You'll get a copy of the report that we will send after with the replay. But if you're itching to have it right now, you can go to echodelta.co/designing for decisions and grab a copy for yourself and go ahead and start taking a look at that right now if you want to. But again, you will receive a copy along with the webinar replay link that'll come out right after we are done here today. So quick round of introductions. I'm Jared Smith. I'm the SVP of Strategy at Echo Delta and a partner at the firm. Very briefly, if you're not familiar with Echo Delta, we're a full service enrollment, marketing, and consulting firm focused on higher education. For my part, I got my start in higher education about 11 years ago when I joined the agency, and it has just been a great journey learning about this incredible industry that we serve and being able to do work like this, where we contribute back to the larger thinking in the industry and to do interesting projects like this. Along with me is Grant DeRue, who's my co-author on the report and co-presenter today. Grant, why don't you introduce yourself to everybody?
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Grant DeRue. I'm the founder and principal of ADV Market Research, and we conduct market research for higher education institutions of all shapes and sizes. And we've had the privilege of working with Jarrett and Echo Delta on a number of client-related work. And Jarrett came to me with this very interesting question around what prospective students look for when they visit websites. And as we'll talk about, of course, so much of the presentation today will focus on website content, but this is really in many ways a proxy for what prospective students are looking for whenever they engage with a college. And that's what really got me interested in the psychology of what students are interested in and what they prioritize when they interact with you, be it digitally, be it in person, be it a campus visit or a college fair table, whatever it may be. So much of the findings that Jarrett and I will share today port across different channels and different modalities and speak to a lot of what students are most concerned about and what they're most excited about too as they engage with your institutions.
Absolutely. Well, so with that, let's jump right in. Enough, Grant, as you're fond of saying, enough wind up. Let's just get to it. So we set out to answer a deceptively simple question. What are prospective students actually trying to do when they visit your website? And specifically, that is a big question. There are so many aspects of a university website. What we really wanted to look at was what I would consider kind of the heart and soul of any university or college website, and that is the admissions, the cost and aid section, and the academic program sections of the website, and to really zero in on that. Because I think if you had to boil, if you could just have a handful of pages and nothing else, those are really the sections that you would absolutely have to have on your university website. There is, of course, a lot of great research that already exists out there on these topics. I know if you're like me, you probably wait around every year for RNL's e-expectations report, and there are other firms doing great work in this area. The thing about that kind of research is that it does tend to be pretty high level. And so when you are really down in the weeds on, say, a website redesign project or just evaluating your own website in granular detail, that research, there's sort of a gap there. And what we wanted to build was a data set, a piece of research that could be helpful in making very tactical decisions and trade-offs and really bringing to the table some empirical data that you might not otherwise have. And sometimes it might have to be forced to do your own guesswork if you can't do proper user research. The core of the research that we're sharing today is based on a methodology called top tasks. Some of you may already be familiar with top tasks research. But if you're not, this is a methodology that was developed by a gentleman named Jerry McGovern, probably 15 or 20 years ago at this point, and it was really purpose built to help very large enterprises and government entities who have sprawling websites and sprawling digital applications understand out of everything that they have on offer, say on their website, what is it that really matters the most to users so that they can take that in and prioritize accordingly. So Grant's going to talk a little bit more about how we adapted this methodology for higher education and what that looked like in the course of our research, and really will be essential, I think, to understanding our findings as we go on today.
The simple description of how this works is that you present before a survey participant a long list of the things that they might try to accomplish when they visit a website. And typically the range that you're looking for is 40 to 50 different tasks. And I think it's important here to think that when we think of tasks, we think of the thing that they are trying to accomplish, not necessarily how that thing might be labeled on a website. So put before people a long list of these tasks, you ask them to choose their top five. And this really forces them to prioritize, right? There might be 10 things that they might want to accomplish. But when you press them to identify their top five, you can really draw the line between what is need to know, what is need to know, what is most important. But in this case, what's most important to our prospective students. The result of this is a long tail. You can see those things that are most important, our top tasks. Then in the next section, you can see our medium tasks. And, and then you get this long tail distribution of tasks that are small or what we might call tiny tasks. And those top tasks account for the top 25% of votes. They account for that top quartile of what people are selecting and what they prioritize. And this is, by the way, this is an actual distribution from this research. And we'll see this slide again here in a few minutes. And it shows you just how those top things really are selected at much greater frequency than even those in the medium tasks, and especially those that are small or tiny tasks. The benefits of this approach are many, and they correspond to Jared, if you'll advance. Thanks. Oh, sorry. I'll back up and say that even before we get to benefits, this is a sample of the list of tasks that we put before prospective student participants. And so this relates to the admissions and aid section of a website. And you can see how we organize the tasks here by admissions, campus visit related tasks, financial aid and scholarships, and even a small section focused on just international related tasks for our international students. Now, as you scan this list, you'll see that this really it covers a lot of ground of what might be included on the admissions or financial aid sections of a website. It may not be comprehensive of every single thing that could possibly be on a college or university website related to admissions and financial aid, but it covers a lot of the big ones. And we covered this, we created this list by scanning through 20 to 30 different college and university websites and sort of compiling this list of what is most commonly represented in this section of the site. When it comes to academic program tasks, we covered a variety of different areas here. Information specific to academic programs, accreditation, cost, experiential learning outcomes. Again, the goal here is to represent the variety of things that students might be looking for information on when they visit your site.
And I think, Grant, one little note here, it was not presented to survey respondents in this format. Each individual item was randomized, so it really forces respondents to scan that list and look for keywords and kind of intentionally overwhelm them with options.
Exactly right. But it's actually part of the survey design is that with so many things there, a respondent is really looking for those keywords and sort of using shorthand to select those things that are most important to them. So that's just one of the benefits. Some of the other benefits of this is that ultimately it's user-centric, right? This is focused entirely on what prospective students are looking to accomplish and what they're looking to get more information about, not what institutions want to say. The focus is on prioritization, not rating. When you do ratings, you can get a lot of noise, and it can be hard to separate the wheat from the chaff. And in this case, when you prioritize, you get that long tail distribution. You can really focus on that top quarter or top half of tasks that are most important. And then ultimately, the use of this kind of data. And I think Jarrett and I work with a lot of institutions on their websites, Jarrett even more so than me, more directly. And whenever designing sites, designing content, there are a lot of internal assumptions, right? We know that there's politics at play in what sections of content get represented where, what's above the fold, what's not. And often websites, they expand, they don't often contract, right? And so there can tend to be a lot of bloat. And we hope that the results of this are highly actionable for the people on this call and the teams that you represent and work with in giving you the information that clearly shows what tasks, what areas of content are most important to our users. So who did we survey, how, and when? We surveyed 1,031 future college students. These were people ages 16 to 55 who intend to enroll in a college degree program within the next 3 years. Now, if you see that age range, 16 to 55, you can see then that we have both traditional and non-traditional students represented, undergraduate and graduate, domestic and international. And the sample was constructed in such a way that it was representative of the overall prospective student body in terms of gender, race, household income, and geography. And in terms of the recency of when we did this, this research was conducted in March of this year. So still sort of off the presses, right? Hot off the presses, pretty recent data collection. And what's been fascinating as well is to see how these results have been validated then in our discussions with colleagues throughout higher ed and even in what we hear from students in our ongoing research on a range of topics. So still feels very much present and representative of the moment. Finally, before we get to the actual results, we wanted to know how much of an issue are college and university websites today, and how well can students find what they're looking for? As you look at the left half of your screen, you can see that we asked prospective students, how often can you find what you need from college websites? 51% of students said mostly. 17% said always. That's about 1 out of 6 students who feel like they can always find what they need from college websites. When we look at that result, we think that that's good, not great, right? That 51% of the time, students feel like they can mostly find what they need. With college and university websites running thousands of pages, it feels surprising that they wouldn't be able to always find what they're looking for. And the second question there, have you ever abandoned a college website because you couldn't find what you needed? More than half, 55%, say that they have. So right off the bat, we're seeing that there is a need for greater representation of the information that students are looking for.
Great. So, with that, we are going to jump in talking about the results of our research. And we're going to start with sort of the biggest, most zoomed out view. We're going to look at aggregate results across all of our student segments and talk about how their priorities shake out overall. Then later in the presentation, we'll work into a more segment by segment look, which is my favorite part, and kind of explore some interesting differences across student segments. But let's start with kind of that biggest picture, and we'll begin with our admissions and aid content. As Grant mentioned, we had 41 admissions and aid tasks. Of those, 5 emerged as disproportionately important to our audiences across the board. And I really want you to turn your attention to that leftmost task, task number 1. Notice how high that graph is. Notice how it stands head and shoulders, even above tasks number 2, 3, 4, 5. So much so, I will say that we started calling this like a super task. So I'm going to ask for a little bit of audience participation right now. I want you to go to your chat window and I want you to see, can you guess what that top admissions and aid task was? What is it that you think students most want to see, most want to know from an admissions and aid perspective when they are viewing your college university website? This is not a trick question, by the way. This is like, you know, the answer to this. I see a lot of it. How to apply, scholarships, cost of attendance, cost, aid info. You guys are absolutely all in the right neighborhood. You are in the right zip code. Specifically, the task was total cost of attendance. So, like the all in cost, tuition, fees, room and board, expenses. What is that? All in cost. The way I interpret this is students are saying, what is this actually going to cost me? I know there's a whole lot more than tuition, and I kind of want to wrap my head around what is that big price tag. Now, the second one, if you squint at your screen closely, you'll be able to see that. But if you don't do that, you probably will not be able to guess the second one. And the second one was something that surprised both Grant and I quite a bit. And the second highest priority for students, payment plan options. So I imagine, I can't see your faces right now, but I imagine there might be some like ruffled, furrowed brows or scrunched up noses. Like, what? Payment plan options? Honestly, this was something that we almost didn't include in our survey, but we do have some institutions that we work with that offer payment plan options as a form of financial aid. And this really struck a nerve. But this did stand out for us because ultimately payment plan options, yes, they are technically offered by most business offices. They are not typically thought of as a form of financial aid. And what's most interesting to me about this is that so many times we think that students are focused primarily on how do I reduce the cost of education, which is true. But this is about managing cash flow. This isn't about managing total cost. So we were shocked that this floated to the top. And I will say, there are some findings that we have in this research that I think extend way beyond the website, as Grant sort of hinted at earlier. This to me is one of those findings that this isn't really about navigation. This isn't about page layout. This is about a conversation that you might have within your enrollment team, within financial aid, to say, this research shows that maybe this is something students are really keyed into. Maybe we should have a conversation about what we might want to do as an institution in this area. Now, I will say, cost and cost-related concerns absolutely dominate admissions and aid tasks. When we look at our top 8 tasks, 7 of them are in some form or fashion related to cost. So I saw some of you typed in scholarships and financial aid. So that was like our number 3 task, top types of financial aid, followed by eligibility requirements, actual cost to attend after financial aid, so net price, and others followed that. So I think from an admissions and aid standpoint, it really is safe to say that students' mindset really is something along the lines of cost first, everything else later. Now, that being said, there is obviously a lot more to admission than just cost and aid. And students do recognize that. Second on their list is the institution's selectivity. And we'll see as we dive into more segmented data that does vary quite a bit based on the student segment. But overall, students are particularly keyed into acceptance rate, followed by things like admission criteria and class profiles, sort of medium tasks in our data set. There were a number of things in our results that students told us were relatively unimportant, but that Grant and I, and I'm sure everyone on the call realized are actually quite important. So some things that actually received very little attention from students: application deadlines, application portal, who's my admissions counselor, what's your standardized test policy. These were all items that received a very small portion of total votes. And so you may be thinking of that and kind of scratching your head. Well, okay, what are we supposed to do with that? Well, I think when we really look at these tasks, what we can note is these things are important, but they are things that tend to be important at a very specific point in time. Take the application portal. This is something we link to usually in our global nav. We put apply now all over our website. And I think we should continue doing that. But a student doesn't need the application portal until they have decided that they're going to apply. And there may be a lot of hurdles they need to jump over before they decide that it's worth applying to the institution. So when it's important, then we need to make it very easy and intuitive for them to find it. But uh, something like total cost of attendance or what kind of financial aid am I eligible for? These are larger, more persistent, more difficult to answer questions, frankly, more emotional questions that loom large in the mind of our prospective students, as we all know. And so that is why we are seeing this get such high priority in the data set. Now, from an academic perspective, let's jump into that. It's an interesting picture. Here's the distribution of votes from our academic program research. We had 49 total tasks. Out of those 49 tasks, 7 revealed themselves as being disproportionately important to students. And here we see kind of a parallel theme along with our admissions and aid research. Students' number one question is, what will this program actually cost me? So our top task for our academic program related information was tuition and fees for the major or program of interest, followed by financial aid options for specific majors or programs. Students are very keyed into the unique cost. And we're going to dive into this in a little more detail because sometimes that's very straightforward to answer for an institution, sometimes much less so, but a top concern. The diversity of concerns, though, I think is much greater on the academic side. We find that many of our students are very focused on the practical, logistical aspects. For instance, will I be taking these classes online or in person? What campuses? What times are classes held? Again, this is an area where we're going to see some interesting differences across segments, but overall, here's how it shakes out. We also find that, yes, students are interested in knowing more about the academics. And actually, this was one of those results that I was actually heartened to see. I've always kind of operated from the mindset that you had that certain segment of students that really wanted to dive into the course catalog, but maybe overall it wasn't important to many other students. What our data shows is that no, students really do want to understand the courses that are required for their major. They want to understand gen ed requirements. They want to see descriptions and syllabi. They want detail. And that revealed itself in our survey. So if you have that course catalog link on your program pages, keep it there. This data absolutely supports that. And of course, we know that students are very focused on whether or not earning the degree will be worth it. And that is absolutely revealed on the academic side of our research. We see that students really are focused on what I call confidence building content. The number one thing they want to see: career paths and success stories from graduates of the program, followed by employment rates of graduates and a whole host of other things. Again, we'll dive into this in more detail in just a bit. But I think what this finding really represented to me was the notion that ultimately students don't buy what you do, they buy what you do for them. And so really that overall value conversation and will this be worth it? Now, some academic tasks that turned out to be not that important to students in the grand scheme of things: graduate school acceptance rates for students that graduated, what makes the program different from options at other schools, program rankings, median salaries of program graduates. Something like program rankings might be a bit surprising to you. And if it is, that's actually a great segue into our next section. Because one of the interesting things that we did in our survey was that not only did we survey prospective students, but we also talked to higher ed professionals and challenged them to predict what prospective students would prioritize. And we got some really interesting results that Grant is going to review with you now.
Yeah. And we'll start with the admissions and aid side of things. And on this next screen, you'll see the top 10 tasks that prospective students selected. And as Jarrett said, we asked higher ed professionals, what do you think are the top tasks that prospective students are looking for? And as those are revealed on the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see that higher ed professionals have about a 50% hit rate on guessing correctly on these top 10. Correct on certain things like total cost of attendance, admissions criteria, actual cost of attendance, application requirements, and types of financial aid. But our assumption or the assumption on the part of higher ed professionals is that more students are looking for things like deadlines, actually accessing the application portal, seeking to visit campus, again, looking at the status of their application, and getting an overview of how to apply for financial aid. Now, what they miss are these things that are highlighted then now on the left side of the screen: payment plan options, acceptance rate, financial aid eligibility, financial aid forms, and the application fee, cost, and waiver. And as you look at those list of things that higher ed professionals expected would be top tasks for students, to me, they suggest two things. The first is an undergraduate student experience, right? That's kind of our frame of reference, and a traditional age student, right? So one who's seeking to visit campus, perhaps one who is looking for those application deadlines because there are fixed deadlines, looking to access the portal. And for many of these things, we find that they are not necessarily student priorities until they become priorities, right? They are point in time types of tasks. And instead, what prospective students are telling us is that they're looking for a lot more cost related information and, and financing related information when it comes to admissions and financial aid. Now, when it comes to academic program tasks, once again, we have the top 10 tasks from students here, and then for what higher ed professionals think students are looking for when it comes to academic programs. You can see that they're doing pretty well on those first three, guessing correctly on looking for the list of all programs or majors offered, career paths and success stories, required courses, tuition and fees, and then online and in-person program options. But where our assumptions start to emerge through are things like program rankings, internship opportunities, program concentrations, what makes the program different, and then median salaries for program graduates. And what's missed in the process are, again, some financing related things, but also average time to completion, employment rates for graduates of the program, student satisfaction, and course descriptions and syllabi. I know we're going to talk about a few of these things in greater detail in just a couple of minutes, but it's worth just taking a look at this list here in totality and seeing what are the things that prospective students tell us are their priorities, and what do we as higher ed professionals assume, or what do we miss in the process?
Great. Thank you, Grant. Well, now we are going to get to my favorite part of the presentation where we look at actually differences across student segments. And we had some interesting findings here. Now, for the purposes of our research, we divided students into three buckets: traditional undergraduates, non-traditional undergraduates, and then graduate and professional students. If you download the report, you will see a number of tables like this. When we segment our data, we present you with a table that shows top 10 tasks in order by segment. We won't be looking at this too much during the presentation because it's kind of a lot to look at, and we'll break it down in other ways. But two things I want to draw your attention to. Number one, you notice these little diamonds on the screen. Those indicate a top 10 task that was unique to the segment. And my observation here that I would point out to you is that, yes, we have some diamonds, we have some things that are high priority tasks that are unique to segments. But I also want to point out that there are a lot of tasks that are universal across segments. And so this is one of the subtler, but I think a very important point. An observation that Grant and I have is that segments differ in some key ways, but they tend to be relatively few in number. They're important, but one segment is not completely different than the other in all aspects. And so I think that that's an important takeaway as you think about, how do I personalize communications? How do I personalize a web experience? It is not important to personalize in every single way that you can. That's at least what our data supports. But it does serve you well to understand a handful of key ways where they do differ. And we'll dive into that in just a moment. One thing that is absolutely a universal top task, and this is why we called it a super task across all of these segments when it comes to admission and financial aid: total cost of attendance is universally important to all student groups. And so I want to dive into this just a little bit better. Grant and I spend a lot of time, more time than we should, looking at university websites and thinking about them and dreaming about them in great detail. Um, and how we handle this question, how we facilitate students answering this question is hugely important. And I will say there are some sites that we're going to reference today that do an excellent job at that. And then there are others that have some room for improvement. So one of the most common sort of hurdles that I see institutions present to students in finding out total cost of attendance is something like this. This is a screenshot. This happens to be a Vector EDU. And by the way, if I call out your college and I use it as sort of an example of what not to do, this is all in a spirit of love and productivity, or productive, constructive criticism. There's a lot that Eckerd College is doing right, but there is an area of opportunity here. So if you look at their admission and aid section, this is the big sort of mega menu that drops down. And you see there are a few different sections here: learn, visit, apply, enroll. Notice that right here, right up at the top under learn, we are driving students to financial aid and scholarships. This is a very common thing. I notice it tends to be more predominant on small private colleges that may have, frankly, a higher sort of a higher sticker price, higher tuition. And there's a tendency to say, let's have that financial aid and scholarships conversation first, and we'll talk about cost when we get there if you dig deep enough on our website. Thing is, when you map what we know about students to that navigation, we see that, yes, there are things that belong here: plan your visit, steps for admitted students, meet your counselor. These things are great, but they are not the thing that we know that students care the most about. Financial aid and scholarships, that is a top task, but there is a higher task than that, and that is total cost of attendance. So if you happen to fall into this category of schools that's kind of pushing students into more of a financial aid conversation, the fix is actually very simple. I urge you to look at the wayfinding of your website and provide very clear and direct wayfinding to something that is obviously cost related. Now, there are multiple ways to peel this eggplant. There's no one sort of magic navigation label. Here are some different examples. On one website, up at the top left, we have under admissions and aid, they have a link to tuition and fees. On the one right below it, it's tuition and cost. On the one to the right-hand side, they divide their mega menu into a little cost and aid section, which I like. And then they provide a clear link to tuition and cost. So there's a variety of words you can use in that language, but a student looking at that knows that I'm going to be able to find cost-related information in those sections, and I'm not making them hunt and peck around the site. Now, when they click on the link, what they find on the other side absolutely matters. And this is another area of opportunity for many institutions. Sometimes what we see is what we have here on the left. This institution is doing a great job of being upfront about, hey, here is your undergraduate tuition for the year. Here are some fees. Now, if you look closely at those fees, you see a bunch of asterisks. So that means that student now needs to read the fine print at the bottom and kind of guess, does this apply to me? Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. Here are some course and program fees that may or may not apply to me. So ultimately, the one on the left is putting the work on the student to break out the calculator, add it all up, do the homework on what fees may or may not apply to them, and try and arrive at a reasonable estimate. When I talk to students who are doing a task like this on their website, what they will say is, well, I got to an answer, because they're not afraid of doing the work usually. I got to an answer, but I don't have confidence that I arrived at the correct answer. And so it introduces that uncertainty. Did I miss something here? On the right-hand side, we see an institution doing something completely different. They're framing cost entirely within a cost per credit hour sort of framework. Students are smart. They understand that cost per credit hour might be one aspect of that, but that is not all of the costs I'm going to incur. So the advice here is actually, this is something that's fairly straightforward to implement on your website. We would urge you to look at doing something like talking about estimated costs in the form of tables, breaking it down potentially with direct costs, indirect costs, totaling it up, doing the math, making some assumptions on their behalf about what kind of fees they're likely to incur. The one on the left, I think, is great. It's very helpful. I love the one on the right even more because it proactively attempts to answer questions students might have, right? What were your assumptions about tuition? What kind of fees are included? What is, travel expenses? It explains it in a little more detail and answers basic questions students might have about that. Now, one important difference that we see across our student type segments is that our traditional undergraduates are keenly focused on acceptance rate to help them understand selectivity. So here we see a variety of selectivity related tasks: acceptance rate, class profile, admission criteria, status of my app. Our traditional undergraduates super focused on acceptance rate. We also note that our graduate students are focused on this too, significantly more than our non-traditional students. We also note, and if you are in admissions, this won't be terribly surprising to you, our traditional undergrads are uniquely fixated on debt. So we had a couple of debt-related tasks in our research. The one that our traditional undergrads selected most was average student debt after graduation. Students are keenly focused on this. And we know that this is a major area of anxiety, not just for the student, but also for parents. So a few years ago, we did a survey of students of college-bound high schoolers, sorry, parents of college-bound high schoolers. And one of the things they told us in the survey was that one of the things that had most negatively impacted their trust in higher education was high student debt. So this is a whole family issue. And as my colleague Jeff Calais on our consulting side is fond of saying, the parents and the student are a co-purchasing unit. And so this is a top concern. Interestingly, we noticed that our non-traditional students and to a certain extent our graduate students are much less focused on average student debt after graduation and more focused on loan repayment policies and options. So there is a recognition from those non-trad students and graduate students that, hey, I realize I'm probably going to be largely self-funding this. Scholarship and financial aid options are limited. So it does imply that there's a certain acceptance of debt with this audience, and they're more focused on how am I going to manage that debt. Now, if you are a school that primarily recruits undergraduate students, I really think you need to be proactive in on your website in starting that debt conversation. One thing that I think is an interesting trend that I would love to see more of is schools proactively publishing debt-related statistics on their website. Here are two examples. This is from UCLA and Berkeley. These blurbs, by the way, on the website are not hidden on some deep subpage. It's actually pretty easy to come by if you get into their financial aid and cost-related sections. But they say, hey, student, here is average debt across the country, and here is our average debt load upon graduation. I think this is super smart. Now, if you work with traditional undergrads, you know that telling them, hey, on average, you're going to leave with $17,000 in debt, that is not the answer they want to hear. But the answer they want to hear, we all know, is you're going to leave with no debt. But that's not realistic for a lot of students. So I think this is a very responsible way to begin setting expectations on the website. And in this case, to still position the institutions favorably and to begin opening that conversation and sort of begin replacing some of the fear that they have with actual facts. Now, there's another way to peel that eggplant. Some schools intentionally probably do not want to publish their average debt load upon graduation, but they can do other things. Here's screenshots from a website that I'm a fan of, Calvin University's website, Calvin EDU. They have a great affordability page. And one thing that they do there is they do proactively talk about student debt. They talk about on-campus job opportunities and how well they're going to prepare you upon graduation. And then at the bottom of that page, they share their loan default rates. And they say, hey, this is the national average for defaulting on student loans. Here's our average. Notice how well prepared our students are. And I think this is super smart because, I mean, ultimately, the concern around debt is how will I pay this? And they're getting right to the heart of that conversation. Another area of our research was around campus visits. Not surprisingly, we find that our traditional undergraduates are the most focused on campus visit options, and particularly in-person campus visit options. I do want to note for our traditional undergrads, virtual info sessions, campus tours ranked at the bottom of their list of priorities of what they wanted to see on your website. And I realize visit options are virtual visits are more or less ubiquitous on higher ed websites. And I would urge you, if you don't have one, you should get one and look into having one. But we do find that with our traditional undergrads, they're keenly much more focused on that in-person campus visit option. From an academic perspective, we'll kind of take a quick tour of this. Here are the top 10 tasks for each of our segment. Notice the diamonds. We do have a handful of tasks that are unique to these segments in their top 10. One task that was not unique, that was universal though, is tuition and fees for the major and program. This, again, what will this program cost me is a key question for students. Now, I do think this is an area where we get quite a bit of variation across institutions. If you are a very small institution that primarily offers, say, undergraduate programs, your tuition and fee schedule is probably very straightforward and may have a few variations, but it's pretty straightforward to understand. If you are a large, comprehensive university with a vast array of programs at all different levels, though, you know that this question can be very hard to answer. And so a couple of things that I think can help, tactical things that I think could really help with that. Number one, if you are, in fact, a large comprehensive institution, I think it makes a lot of sense for you to include links to cost estimates directly on program related pages. So over here on the left, this is from Missouri S&T. If you go into their program finder, you get this little modal pop up, and right there, they highlight cost and even scholarship information related to the program right there in that modal window. I think that's super, super smart. University of Arizona, this is a screenshot from one of their graduate certificate programs. I love the way that they prioritize this. Look at the links on the right-hand side. View department website. Okay. How to apply. Okay, it's there when you need it. Understand cost and aid. This is appropriately prioritized. This is a great way to make, say, that apply link easy to get to when you know you need it, but also understanding and empathizing with students and understanding what their real questions, pressing questions are. Now, to take this to the next level, I think large comprehensive universities really should invest the time in developing a set of streamlined tools that will help students answer that question quicker. A good example, a site that I talk about frequently, is the University of North Dakota. If you go to their main admission page, this is the main call to action right up at the top of that page. Calculate cost by program. Again, this is a very student-centric way to organize your page. You click on that, you get taken to this form. They ask you a few questions about yourself. They ask you a little bit about the program that you intend to enroll in. And then they give you something like this, a breakdown of tuition and fees. Now, this I think is a good start. I don't love that it's talking primarily based in terms of credit hour. I think we can do a little bit better than that, but this is a really good start at getting someone a reasonable answer on the website for very little effort. I think the best in class example, though, that I can share with you right now, this is again from Missouri S&T. They have a whole cost estimate section on their website where they list all of their programs along with cost ranges. Look at how elegant that interface is up at the top. I love this, right? You can enter in your program, search for it directly. You can easily select the academic level, your residency status. And then once you do, when you click into a program, you get this beautiful table laid out with estimated totals. And then here's the kicker. Here's what I also really love about this. So you just presented a student with a $32,000 price tag. And what's next to it? Calculate your scholarships. This is a very thoughtful flow in how you masterfully sort of help manage that conversation and present students with tools where they can confidently arrive at reasonable answers and anticipating the questions that they're going to have as they engage with your site. So I love this example, and I would love to see more institutions do things like this. Digging into some other differences across segments, we note that both graduate and non-traditional students very much prioritize feasibility and fit. So they are looking at things like online versus in-person options, average time to complete, times when classes are held. Even when they're looking at online classes, is this synchronous? Is this asynchronous? These are the concerns of our graduate and non-traditional students. So, with that in mind, if you market heavily to graduate and non traditional students, I urge you, even within your program pages, begin answering that feasibility and fit question early. I think a great example here is someone like Purdue Global's law school. This is their online Juris Doctor page. They immediately answer the question around what is the program length, how many hours per week can you expect to invest, credits required, cost per credit. I love that they're answering these big questions here. I want to note something. Look, they do have a ranked program, but look how they prioritize it. They put it below this information because they're not getting the story confused. They're answering the students' most pressing questions first. And I think this is the right way to prioritize things. Um, now, digging into some additional differences across these segments, we noticed that our traditional undergraduates are super focused on outcomes, what I call confidence building related content. What they really want to see are career paths and success stories from graduates in the program, employment rates for grads of the program. Down here at the bottom, program rankings, national recognition, median salaries, not that compelling to those students. So basically, what they tell us is their lower priority is stuff like this, right? Our generic sort of Bureau of labor statistics, our Chess Beatty rankings. It's not that those things are completely unimportant. They do have value, but what we urge you to do is think about telling a more program specific story. Think an institution that's doing a masterful job of that is Bentley University. They do an incredible job on individual program pages talking about individual student program paths and program specific outcomes. So, what we find is that students want to know program specific information, not institution wide specific outcomes information. They go so far as to develop a career profile with every graduating class. They talk about placement. They talk about the institutions or the employers they go to work with, the titles they got, the compensation packages they received. This is really an excellent, I think, best in class example of how to do this. Now, as in part of our survey, we did end up with one of those surprise little sneaky results that we didn't expect. This is kind of like the payment plan options thing. We included in our survey an option to select student satisfaction with the program, student satisfaction rates. And we included this because we have one or two institutions we can point to that do speak to this on their website. And we thought, hey, let's throw this in. This looks interesting. Man, did that really strike a nerve with students. We were surprised by that. But you know what? We really should not have been surprised by that at all. We have institutionalized student feedback, right? Student satisfaction ratings. I know my kids, when they go to buy something on Amazon, they're like, Dad, I saved up my money. I want to buy this fishing pole. And I read the reviews and it looks great, right? We have sites in our industry like Niche where people are giving extensive reviews. Students, when they can't find the information they want, are going to forums like Reddit and they are seeking out this information. So it should be no surprise that students really care about that student satisfaction information. And yet, as an industry, we rarely publish anything like this. I think this is an enormous opportunity. In looking around, really, I can only come up with a handful of examples. Meredith College runs a student satisfaction survey. They publish the results on their website. Purdue Global, they participate in a voluntary law school specific student satisfaction survey and they publish the results on their website. But Grant and I have done enough brand perception studies to know that sometimes we end up with institutions that have amazing ratings from their students and it is nowhere to be found on the website.
Mhm.
So if that resonates with you, I'd really urge you to consider that. So
And
with
the
that,
pro
Grant's going to talk about segments by admissions stage, and let's keep rolling.
Excellent. All right. So as Jarrett mentioned, we looked at this from a number of different dimensions, not just who the student is and where they're at in their degree seeking journey, but where they're at in the admissions process as well. And we ask students directly to self-categorize or self-describe where they're at, and then we coded them on the back end as gathering information, actively applying, or imminently enrolling. And what we find is when we break this down by admissions and aid, we start to see some differences here. And you'll see a very similar table here to what Jared has shown in the previous section. You can see a couple of those black diamonds, uh, but more often than not, you don't see those little black diamonds, right? There is a lot of commonality here. And there's a couple of things that predominate. For instance, you can see here how much cost is a persistent part of the admissions process, regardless of where you're at in the cycle. Cost-related items are hugely represented in those who are gathering information, right? Because part of gathering information is, can I afford this? Can I make this feasible, financially feasible for me? Then in the applying stage, and then in the enrolling stage as well, seeking some of those confidence building factors that Jarrett was talking about a moment ago, but kind of with a spin on it. Confidence building in the sense that this is financially possible for me, feeling confident in the investment that students are making in their degree. So cost is well represented throughout, and selectivity, understandably, increases mid-funnel, right? That those who are applying place greater emphasis or are seeking more information about acceptance rate, admissions criteria, and the class profile. So there are some natural differences here, but mostly there's a lot of commonality throughout each stage of the admission cycle. Some areas of difference as well include campus visits. And this was fascinating to see that searching for in-person campus visit options was a greater priority for those who are planning to enroll. They've already applied. And maybe you've experienced that yourselves in your work with prospective students. And we have seen this anecdotally, and we've heard from clients that the campus visit has shifted down funnel, right? That it's no longer the most commonplace thing that students do all their campus visits in the summer before their senior year of high school, right? That now it's, I'm going to apply, I'm going to see where I get in, I'm going to see where I get financial aid, and then I'm going to visit and make my determination based on that visit. And we see that represented here in these results. When we look at the academic program tasks by admission stage, once again, a great deal of commonality here. So not a lot of differences, though there are a few areas that are worth calling out. Specifically, Jared, if you'll advance here, thank you. Um, where students prioritize these fit with life considerations, that those who are gathering information are more likely to be seeking some of the filtering information, like, do you have this program in the modality I'm looking for? How much time is it going to take to complete this degree program? Which, by the way, I saw we had a question about, and we'll look forward to answering that here as we conclude in just a moment. When are classes held? Average weekly time commitment. So basically, can I make this work for me? And this is especially poignant for non-traditional students. And on the other hand, one other area of difference here that's noteworthy is enrolling students then asking, will this be worth it? Once they've applied, they've gathered their information, they've applied, and now they're at the point of making a decision. They're seeking that information that will help them determine ROI for the program, right? Career paths and success stories for program graduates, internship opportunities, employment rates, student satisfaction. Now, sort of really the rubber meets the road, and they need to make tough choices about what they're going to choose. And this type of information helps inform that choice and makes them feel good about it at the same time. One other area of difference that we explored was some of this differences between those who are planning to attend two-year colleges and those who plan to attend four-year colleges and universities. And while there wasn't a ton of difference in a lot of areas, there were some key differences that sort of that make sense intuitively based on the differences in these two student populations. So you can see here the top admissions and financial aid tasks. There is a slightly greater focus on financial aid forms and loan repayment amongst two-year students. more emphasis on admissions criteria and the status of my application amongst four-year students. It makes sense, right? When it comes to academic program tasks, we see here a greater focus on some of those practical or logistical concerns. Average time to complete the degree, times when classes are held, online student support services, and average weekly time commitment. Those things are more likely to be important to two-year students. Therefore, that information should be more prominent, right, on our community college or junior college, technical college websites. In turn, four-year students are more likely to be seeking that career information. So on the back end, you can see that represented in the chart here as well. Career paths and success stories, student satisfaction, employment rates, some of those confidence building things, those are more important to our four-year students than our two-year students. So now we'll think about, now that you've seen all these results, how do we apply this? How do we think about this practically, and what does it mean for your college and university website?
So there are a variety of ways that you can begin applying this research. I think one of the simplest things you can do as an immediate first step is to begin socializing the report and the research. Sharing this with colleagues, certainly within your marketing or admission team, but maybe even finding folks that, maybe for instance on the financial aid side of the house and suggesting that maybe they read the report, that there were some interesting findings. I think also looking for opportunities where maybe previously you were having internal debates and it was kind of based on guesswork and opinions, and now finding places where you can insert a little bit of helpful empirical data to maybe settle some of those internal debates and to move from there with confidence.
And as you saw throughout many of the sections that we just showed, when we broke it down by segment, there's a lot of commonality between prospective students here. And yes, there are areas of key difference, but as you think about designing your site, design with those shared priorities in mind first. There's perhaps too much of a focus on ultra granular personalization in higher education marketing. And I think as we look at these results, there's a lot here that tells us that there are universal priorities, regardless of student type or where they're at in the admissions process. And designing for those shared priorities is a winning strategy because you can't hyper specialize the website for every single type of student.
Good deal. Now, if you really want to take this to the next level, I would say a great next step would be to begin measuring and improving your top tasks. So in our research, we laid out for you, here are what different types of students prioritize. So a great next step would be to take that, look at those handful of disproportionately important tasks, and to challenge, do some user testing. Take that prospective student and watch them go through attempting to find types of aid or attempting to determine their total cost. Make some quantitative measurements of that. What is their success rate? How many times do they sort of end up in cul-de-sacs and error out on that test? How long does it take them? But also gather some qualitative feedback. What did they say their experience is like as they attempt to accomplish those tasks? And then use that information to improve your website, to make, say, a new prototype and retest it and see if you actually can make a measurable improvement in those top tasks. I think that that is a way where you can really zero in on some very high impact areas and make that sort of measurable improvement that you want to see.
And last thing we'd say is, while so much of this research and this presentation focused on the website, it's really just one example of the ways in which prospective students engage with your institutions. And so much of these results carry over to the other ways, whether it's, as I said at the beginning, a college fair table, visiting campus, whether they pick up the phone and call, or the print materials that you share with prospective students, or other digital channels. So much of this information can apply across those very different ways that you engage prospective students, and it speaks more to their overall priorities and what they're seeking to accomplish whenever they connect with you.
Absolutely. So with that, we are coming right up to the end, but we've got a couple of minutes left for Q&A, and we did get a couple of questions in the Q&A feature. If you have any questions, by all means, jump in, add them, and we'll do our very best to answer them. The first question comes from Danielle, and she says, we have program pages on our website, and we often hear from program coordinators that it's challenging to provide a clear timeline for completion since it can vary based on many factors. Do you have any suggestions or best practices for how we should communicate this to prospective students? And along with that, Danielle asks, hey, additionally, our programs are hour based, for example, 60 hours to complete. But I wonder how well that translates for incoming students. Would it be more helpful to frame it in terms of estimated number of years, such as 4 years? Grant, would you want to
Yeah,
take a shot at that?
I will. Yeah. So for the first question around timeline for completion, I think a good parallel here is what you see with many graduate programs, which is if they are offered in both full-time and part-time formats, several programs will say this program can be completed in 1 year if enrolled full-time, or 2 to 3 years for part-time students. And I think there's maybe a parallel that can be drawn here for those programs that do have those variable timelines, depending perhaps on if a student is adding a concentration or if they come in with a certain number of credits. I think the more that you can provide those examples, the more questions you'll answer, and the more you demonstrate that you're thinking sort of empathetically about what a student is looking for.
Mhm.
When it comes to how we measure the time of a degree, credit hours is not the way to do it. I think, it's one of those things we see over and over again with prospective students. It is a unit of measurement that we use so much in higher education, and it's virtually meaningless for those outside of the academy. I think a much better, much clearer way to convey program length is months and years. And the greater specificity, the better. But I love this question because 60 hours to complete is so hard to wrap your head around as a prospective student, not knowing even how many credits there are per class, let alone how many credits they might take in a term or throughout the course of a year. And so
Mhm.
turning that around and sort of doing the conversion to months and years will be much clearer for prospective students.
Yeah, kind of building on that, I think it also depends on what is that student's level of sophistication and their understanding of higher education. So certainly, you think of that incoming FTIC credit hours is not going to be particularly relevant to them. I have had conversations with transfer students or graduate students where they do look for credit information because they know what it is. It's not their first rodeo and they know how to interpret that information and where else to look. But I would say it's supplemental to that more straightforward. Hey, like Grant said, this can be completed in as little as a year, or if you're attending part-time, 2 to 3 years. I think that example that we showed of Purdue Global's Juris Doctor page is a good example. They answer both questions. So if a student understands credit hours and they know what to do with that, it's available, but we're also getting a more universally easily understood answer. So it's sort of a yes and.
Yeah.
Okay, next question. Let's see. Oh, Grant, you're going to love this one. Anne says, "Hey, you noted that you had some international questions. Did you break them out as a segment?" I know this was your inclusion, Grant. So I'll let you take
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate the question. And uh, uh, one of the things we did on the back end in the analysis was break this down by international and domestic, race, household income, even student GPA, and a couple of other factors. And what was amazing was how few statistically significant differences there were. And in this particular case, there weren't any significant differences between international and domestic students in the importance of these priorities. And that was really surprising. Even on the admissions and aid section, we included those international focused things like international student requirements or visa application process, those types of things. Those were medium tasks at best, but they tended to be small and tiny tasks. And international students, like domestic students, tended to prioritize those cost and criteria related items that we talked about throughout the presentation. So really not much of a difference there. The one kind of difference I'll note is it probably won't surprise the people on this call to hear that one difference we saw amongst students based on household income was that students at the highest end of the income range were far more likely to prioritize honors program information
Hmm.
in the admissions and aid section. And so kind of seeking that sort of more prestige-oriented pathway at an institution. So that was one of the few areas of difference. Otherwise, there was a lot of the common ground.
Yeah. So we have one more question. This is a great one, and
Mm.
this zeroes in on something that was very surprising to me in the research. They ask, it's interesting to me that students don't seem interested in how our program is different. We're focused on differentiators. Should we not be? So, uh, this is something that historically, when I've been advising clients on telling the story of a particular program, that you need to lean in heavily about what makes that program different. I think this may, Grant, I'm curious on your take on this, but my take on it is that I think this may be one of those things that has some value, but relative to these other pressing concerns is relatively low. So I would say, in my take, if I was designing, say, a program, let's say you've got a great Bachelor of Economics and you've got an economics institute and, some really interesting opportunities related to that program, I'd say, yeah, still talk about that on your program page, but realize that relative to these other concerns, other things are weighing much more heavily on that student's mind. And so talk about it if you can. It's sort of like the rankings, right? I think, like, again, Pretty Global did a great job of sort of acknowledging in that graduate program page, we understand you have these logistical concerns. We're going to prioritize that. We'll let you know we've got a great ranking, but we're not blowing it out into this section where we've got a message from the dean talking about our rankings and how amazing our programs is. It's sort of appropriately prioritized in the overall flow of the page. Grant, do you have any other dimensions that you would add to that?
One thing I would add is this is one area in which different types of students actually were different in how this
Mm.
is important. Uh, you might have seen this on the screen earlier, but when we broke this down by traditional age, non-trad, and graduate students, how the program is different from what students might find at other schools actually was a top task for our traditional students.
Oh my gosh,
So
Grant,
this
thank you for
actually
reminding
was
me of that.
important for our traditional undergraduate students, and it was number 10, but still it was a top task.
Yeah.
And so this is, I think it is something to bear in mind, something to represent on a program page. But again, this is one of those circumstances in which you have to bear the audience in mind.
Mm.
And in this case, it was more important to traditional students than to other student types.
Good deal. Well, folks, it is now 2:06. If anybody has any follow-on questions, I'd be happy to stick around and answer, but I think we don't have any additional questions. Thank you so much for attending. We will be sending out a replay link along with access to the report following the webinar. So keep an eye on your inbox for that. And thank you so much. I hope this was valuable. And yeah, so take care, everybody. Have a great rest of your afternoon.
Thank you.